Now, Senator Bernie Sanders is no stranger to hate inspired from the billionaire class. Now, during an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, and this is the newest example, billionaire megadonor Ham Saban said that he loves every 2020 presidential candidate, save for one. Now, who is it? Well, I'm going to give you a guess. He said, quote, I profoundly dislike Bernie Sanders. And you can write it. I don't give a hoot. Ooh, what? Strong words. Strong words. Okay, and who gives a hoot about Ham Saban? Unless you're a gigantic, okay, I'm not going to say that because he is a gigantic donor. I was going to say unless you're a politician looking for a gigantic check from Ham Saban, you don't care about this guy. Now, this guy has, of course, Saban has a net worth of that's estimated to be around or just about $3 billion, right? And he said his disdain for the Vermont senator stems from his frequent denunciations of the billionaire class. Quote, and you're going to love this, he's a communist, hiding under the cover of being socialist. He thinks that every billionaire is a crook. He calls us the billionaire class, and he attacks us indiscriminately. It's the billionaire class. It's the bad guys. Are you sad, Mr. Saban? Is that mean old guy from Vermont being mean to you? I cannot stand how everyone who have everything in the world, billions of dollars, has such thin skins. By the way, Bernie Sanders, of course he's wrong when he says that Bernie Sanders is a communist. No, he's not a communist, he's barely a socialist, right? No, what it is that he is a social democrat in the vein of FDR. Now, he believes in capitalism, but a form of capitalism that is heavily regulated and has strong Nordic-style safety nets, a welfare state, right? Now, are billionaires bad people? Is Bernie Sanders saying billionaires are bad people? No, he's not saying billionaires are bad people. He's saying that they have too much influence over the political spectrum. Now, if you ask me, are billionaires bad people? I would argue most of them are. Not all of them, most of them. After all, they are the ones that, again, are influencing our political system with campaign donations. And the reason that they're doing so is so that they can get a return on investment. So they can get more in tax breaks, subsidies, so they can basically hoard more money. Now, these billionaires are Koch brothers. So those are the basic examples of really bad billionaires. Now, the not so bad billionaires, but still ones that I don't want to see influencing our politics, are people like George Soros and Tom Steyer. Now, those people are invested in the status quo. They don't like Bernie Sanders' message of taxing the rich to pay for social programs. Popular social programs like an expansion of Medicare, an expansion of Social Security and free college, and also eliminating student loan debt. They hate that. Now, Tom Steyer, who is actually really good on the environment, just announced that he'll be running for president. And the question, of course, is why? Why? Now, again, he believes that he can buy the 2020 nomination. Again, I love his work on the environment, but I also hate that a handful of billionaires has such a massively outsized influence on public policy. And the reason is, of course, because, for one, I believe in democracy, right? I believe that all the people should have the same voice, right? When you have money in politics, when you have campaign contributions, our politicians will tend to listen to the people who give them the biggest checks. And that, of course, always is the business interests and the corporate interests and the very, very wealthy. And look, that influence that they have because of their money, they use to influence politicians against things like free college and Medicare for all. So I also hate that these same billionaires, some of them at least, have gotten their money by crushing their workers. A good example of that is Jeff Bezos. That's one example. There are plenty more. I'm not saying that there are good rich people, but I think in this system, I'll agree with AOC that for every billionaire, It's a failure of social policy. Because for every billionaire, there's 40% of the country that can't afford a $400 emergency. I mean, again, when you have such examples of extreme wealth where they don't know how to spend their money, they have so much money, they don't know what to do with. And yet you have half the country, nearly half the country, that can't afford an emergency. And about a little more than half the country that can't afford a $1,000 emergency. You have a system that is fundamentally broken. But it's not just for that reason, the fact that Bernie Sanders calls out the billionaire class, is why Ham Saban does not like Senator Sanders. He actually also told the New Yorker in 2010 that he is a one-issue guy. Now, what is his issue? Israel. Now, Saban, and it makes sense in his context, he's Jewish, right? So now, Saban, who was Jewish, attacks Bernie Sanders, who was also Jewish. Now, why? Well, the reason has to do with Palestinian rights. Now, Bernie Sanders last year spearheaded a letter that called for humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. Because, God forbid, we treat Palestinians as human freaking beings. He said, senators, for you to listen to Senator Sanders and accuse Israel being the main culprit is outrageous, misinformed, offensive, and shows a lack of understanding of the region's basic fundamentals. Now, that is in response to a letter that Democrats, that Bernie Sanders had, put forward to Democrats had signed into. Saban ended up emailing Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not Saban. Sanders emailed Mike Pompeo and told him to act urgently in order to help relieve the humanitarian crisis at the Gaza Strip. This was enough to get Saban incredibly angry over this. Now, what was happening at that time? Well, Sanders' letter, according to The Intercept, came amid a deadly Israeli response to a protest movement in the Gaza Strip. 3 days after the senator sent a letter, Israel fired on another round of peaceful protesters, leaving dozens dead and hundreds more wounded. That's what we have here, right? It's almost as if, as a human being, Bernie Sanders is opposed to an occupation that denies human beings of human rights. Weird. Apparently, you're not allowed to do that if you're Jewish. I don't know the rules. I'm not Jewish. I don't know the rules, but apparently you can't criticize Israel, the right-wing government of Israel, at all. Look, Sanders is one of the few politicians that is able to stand up to the right-wing government of Israel, who's not, and by the way, the right-wing government of Israel under Benjamin Netanyahu is not interested in granting human rights to Palestinians or promoting peace in the region. They want a U.S.-led war against Iran and the ability to build settlements on other people's land without any repercussions. That is a move that the United Nations has condemned. Now, the Sanders campaign, of course, is very, very quick to welcome Saban's hatred. Here you have Josh Miller-Lewis, Sanders' digital communications director, who tweeted this out. You can tell who's doing a job by the enemies they make, and we've made a lot of enemies. That is a quote from Bernie Sanders. You also have speechwriter David Sirota tweeting this out. Siri, show me the hatred that we welcome. I love it. Now, what's funny is that all these billionaires and all these establishment figures that have come out against Bernie Sanders has led to their campaign releasing an anti-endorsements list. I love it. I love it. Now, after releasing this list, Sanders said in a statement, quote, you can tell who's truly fighting for working families by the enemies they've made, and we've made a lot of enemies. That is, of course, the quote that I referenced earlier, but more full and more in context. Now, who is on this anti-endorsements list? Well, obviously, they include Ham Saban, but also Billionaire Home Depot co-founder Kenneth Langone, former CKA Restaurants CEO Andy Puzder, former Verizon CEO Lowell McAdam, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon, are you seeing a pattern here? Disney CEO Bob Iger, former GE CEO Jeffrey Immelt, former Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein, former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, centrist think tank Third Way, former Goldman Sachs partner Leon Cooperman, Home Depot co-founder Bernard Marcus, and billionaire hedge fund manager Stanley Druckenmiller. And I'm assuming that this list is going to continue to grow over the course of the primary, and if he makes it into the general election. I'm just saying, this is a very small list so far, but it's going to get a lot bigger. And as you can see, it's mostly people who are incredibly wealthy and well off, and a lot of companies who actually crush their workers and don't pay them good wages. Now, Sanders finally added this, quote, "These people have a vested interest in preserving the status quo so they can keep their grip on power, so they can continue to exploit working people across America." He added, "We welcome their hatred." Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.